Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa barik wa sallim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Once again, I welcome you all to another lecture of International Financial Management, chapter number 3 and lecture number 3. In our today's lecture, we'll have discussion on international credit market, which is also called Euro credit market, international bond market, which is called Euro bond market, and international stock market. Let me mention that we have already discussed these three markets on introductory level in our first lecture of this chapter. So hope you guys have already watched and studied the relevant lecture notes of that lecture. So let's begin without any further ado in wasting time. Let's begin with the international credit market. International credit market is basically, you can see, it's a medium term. It's a market where multinational corporations and banks and other financial institutions and non-financial institutions, when they are in short time, they need fund for medium term, or when they are in deficit and they want to fulfill their financial needs, and the time period they required that funds for is medium term, then they access to the Euro credit market. Before this, we discussed Euro currency market. That was for short term. Short term means less than 1 year, but this is medium term. What does medium term means? Different people have different opinion about the medium term, but it could be from 1 to 3 years or from 1 to 5 years, and more than 5 years or more than 3 years can be the long term. Some people say that from 1 day to 1 year, that is the short term, but some says from 1 day to 3 years is the short term. From 3 to 5 is the medium term, but it depends upon the geography and the definition from the investor's perspective. But the main thing is that in the Euro credit market, medium term funds are deposited or lended, right, between or by the banks and multinational corporations. Okay, multinational corporations sometimes obtain medium term funds through term loans from local financial institutions or through the issuance of notes, medium term debt obligations, and their local markets. Loans of 1 year or longer extended by banks to multinational corporations or government agencies in the Europe are commonly called Euro credit or Euro credits or Euro credit loans. International credit market is constituted by the banks who provide long-term loans in foreign currency. Okay. Regulations in the credit market. So based on what regulation this market is basically operated? Let's talk about that. Okay. There is an act called Single European Act. Based on this regulation, this market is basically maintained, and then we have Basel Accord, and then there are some other regulations based on which this market is maintained. So let's talk about first Single European Act. Capital can flow freely throughout the Europe. That's the first regulation in the Single European Act. It says capital can flow freely throughout the Europe. Means the money can come in and go out from the Europe freely without any difficulties. Banks can offer a wide variety of lending, leasing, and security activities in the Europe. That's the other regulation under the Single European Act. Number 3 is regulations regarding competitors, mergers, and taxes are similar throughout the Europe. So wherever you go within the Europe, competition, mergers, and taxes regulations are same. A bank established in any one of the European countries has the right to expand into any or all of the other European countries. So basically, these four laws or regulations under the Single European Act basically regulates the international credit market, and basically these are the rules for international credit market. There is another agreement which is called Basel Accord. Based on this, banks must maintain capital equal to all assets, equal to at least 4% of their assets. For this purpose, banks' assets are weighted by risk. So, if you remember in the previous semester, you studied financial statements analysis subject, where you had a ratio called Camel's ratio, right? So Camel's ratio or capital adequacy ratio, basically capital adequacy ratio is the ratio through which the bank's risk-weighted capital or assets are weighted, and that's the ratio which shows which bank is strong capitally and financially. So based on the Basel Accord, all banks at least they should maintain 4% of their total asset. So less than 4% is not acceptable, which means that banks can lend the money that they have throughout the Europe, and the capital can move freely, because they only have to keep 4% with them, which will save the bank from bankruptcy. Next, we have loans of 1 year or longer or extended by the Euro banks to MNCs or government agencies in the Euro credit market. These loans are known as Euro credits, right? The loans which are for more than 1 year period, those loans are called Euro credits, and the market where we can obtain those loans is the Euro credit market. Floating rates are commonly used since the bank's assets and liability maturity may not match. Okay, so in the Euro credit market, banks use floating exchange rate, and the reason is so they can match their assets and liabilities. Euro banks accept short-term deposits but sometimes provide long-term loans. Okay, so that's all about the Euro credit market. Let's have a recap and summarize it. We said that Euro credit market is made basically for a medium-term loans, where banks and other financial institutions accept deposits in dollars, dominated by dollar, maybe in other currencies as well, and provide loans in international currency for medium term, which is for more than 1 year. For less than 1 year, it's Euro currency market. For more than 1 year, it's which is for medium term up to 3 years or 5 years, it's Euro credit market. We said that the Euro credit market is regulated under the Single European Act and under the Basel Accord, and the loans, the banks which are involved in the Euro credit market, they are also called Euro credit banks. The loans they provide is the Euro credit loans. Okay, that was all about the Euro credit market. Now let's talk about international bond market or Euro bond market. Basically, Euro bond market is a market where people do long-term financing, means accept deposits and provide loans for longer period of time. And bonds are basically, to do that, bonds are issued. In earlier two markets, euro currency market and euro credit market, there was no financial security. There were banks accepting deposits and providing loans. But here in this market, you can borrow money from the banks or from any other financial institutions, or they can borrow, but with the help of issuing bonds. And it's for long term, most of the times for more than 5 years. And those bonds which are dominated by the foreign currencies, not in the local currency. Bonds dominated in the currency of the country where they are placed but issued by borrowers foreign to the country are called foreign bonds or parallel bonds. In the international bond market, there are two types of bonds. Number one, foreign bonds or parallel bonds. Number two, euro bonds. So let's talk about first what is the foreign bond or parallel bond. It's a bond, right, dominated in the currency of the country where they are placed, but issued by the borrower foreign to the currency. Okay, it means that they are issued in one currency, in one country or one currency, but bought by another country citizen. For example, bonds issued in America bought by the Chinese and Afghanis and other people who are not native to America, those bonds are called foreign bonds or parallel bonds. Next we have euro bonds, bonds that are sold in countries other than the country represented by the currency dominating them are called euro bonds. Okay, so euro bonds are basically the bonds issued by the foreigners, okay, in a country and purchased by the local people. So that's the difference between the euro bond and foreign bonds. Okay, euro bonds are underwritten by multinational syndicate of investment banks, simultaneously placed in many countries through second stage and it in many cases third stage underwriters. Okay, we will talk about the second stage and third stage underwriters, but before that you need to know what is an underwriter. Underwriters are basically those financial institutions or banks who help the issuer of bonds with finding the customers or finding the market for the bonds that they issue. For example, I am a multinational corporation and I want to issue a bond. The underwriting will be that another bank comes and buys my bond and then sells that further, right? That is called underwriting. Euro bonds are usually issued in bearer form, pay annual coupons, may be convertible, may have variable interest rates, and typically have few protective covenants. What does it mean? It means that euro bonds, there is a specific value on its face, and a euro bond holder is paid annually with interest, and they are convertible into other financial assets, and the interest rates vary, right? Interest rates for each currency and each credit condition in the euro bond market change constantly, causing the probability of the market to vary among the currencies. Means for each currency there is a different exchange rate, there is a different interest rate. Looking at the currency strongness, there are different exchange rates, and bonds can be in different currencies. Some bonds you can buy on euros, some bonds you can buy on pounds, some bonds you can buy on US dollars, but about 70% of the euro bonds are dominated in the US dollars, right? So most of the transactions in the euro bond market is in US dollars. Next we have international stock market. International stock market, it's a market where everywhere from around the world can buy the stocks of the international firms who are listed in the international stock market, right? So it gives an access to everywhere in the world to investors from any country of the world. In addition to issuing stock locally, multinational corporations can also obtain funds by issuing stock international market. This enhances a firm's image and name recognition and diversity of the shareholders. Stock issued in US by non-US firms or governments are called Yankee stock or Yankee offerings. Yankee stock offerings, for example, in the New York Stock Exchange, if there are stocks issued by the non-US companies, those stocks are called Yankee stock offerings. Many of such recent stock offerings result from privatization programs in Latin America and Europe. Non-US firms may also use American depository receipts, which are certificates representing bundles of stock, and they are less strictly regulated. So on the international stock market, we have Yankee stocks offering, we have American stocks, and we have American depository receipts. So there are these different types of stocks available on the international stock market. Market characteristics are important too. Stock markets may differ in size, trading activity level, regulatory requirement, taxation rates, and proportion of individual versus institutional share ownership. So these are basically the criteria based on which international stock markets may differ from one another. The first one is size of the stock market. Number 2, trading level. Number 3, regulatory requirements. Number 4, taxation rates. And number 5 is proportion of individuals versus institutional share ownership. Means how much individuals are investing and how much institutions are investing on the stock market. Electronic communication network, ECNs, have been created to match orders between the buyers and sellers around the world, right? So in international stock market, there is a system called electronic communication network system, based on which this market is wholly regulated, and people can place orders, and there is an order matchmaking. Electronic network system becomes more popular over time. They may ultimately be merged with one another or with other exchanges to create a single global stock market. There is a possibility that all the international stock markets, their electronic communication networks are linked together in a single international or global stock market is developed, where all the people from around the world without boundaries can basically trade on that market. Okay, so that was all about these remaining 3 markets: international credit market, international bond market, and international stock market. Okay, let's have a chapter review. In this chapter, we discussed motives of using in financial markets, motives for investing in foreign markets, motive for providing credit in foreign markets, motives for borrowing in foreign markets. That was our first lecture. Then we had second lecture where we discussed about foreign exchange market. We discussed the history, which is the transactions, interruption, and currency future options and forwards. And then we had discussion on euro currency market. We discussed how it's developed, what's the competition, standardization and regulation. Then we had discussion on euro credit market and euro bond market and international stock market, and issuance of foreign stock and issuance of foreign stock in US, issuance of stock in foreign markets by the US. That is what we discussed in this chapter. These are the topics that we had. And then we had a discussion on comparison of international financial markets, which we discussed in our basically first lecture. Let me show you that slide. We had discussion on the okay. Okay, we can differentiate each financial market based on borrowers, investors, and creditors. So each type of market has different borrower, different investors, and different creditors. Basically, we can differentiate them based on the time period as well, based on the transaction that takes place in that specific market. So that is all for today's lecture. I thank you very much for being with me. If you have any questions, please come back to me. I'm more than happy to help you and explain the doubts that you have. So take care of yourselves, stay home, stay safe. Bye.